Welcome back to another video lesson for our sentence structure series. In the last two lessons, we talked about the two common errors we have to watch out for when writing our sentences: fragments and run-ons. In the next two lessons, we're going to learn specific types of clauses that can help us express our ideas better and correctly when writing our sentences. And in this lesson, we're going to focus on relative clauses. So what is a relative clause? Before we answer that question, I want us to look at this sentence. Mr. Chan moved to Bangkok last week, wants to meet you. So, what do you think of this sentence? Are you thinking what I'm thinking? There's something off about this sentence, right? He's talking about two things here. First, Mr. Chan moved to Bangkok last week. Second, Mr. Chan wants to meet you. And the problem is, you don't know exactly what he wants to say in this sentence. So when we write a sentence, we normally have a main point we want to convey. And in this sentence, we don't know if he mainly wants to say that Mr. Chan moved to Bangkok last week or he wants to meet you. Which one is it? This is a problem of some English learners. They want to include many ideas in a sentence, but they don't know how to combine them correctly. Okay, let's assume that the main thing that we want to say is Mr. Chan wants to meet you. But for some reason, you want to describe Mr. Chan or give information about him by saying that he moved to Bangkok last week. This is where we can use a relative clause. So a better way of writing this sentence is Mr. Chan, comma, who moved to Bangkok last week, comma, wants to meet you. So we have two clauses here. For the first clause, we have Mr. Chan as our subject, wants as our verb, and Mr. Chan wants to meet you is our independent clause. We also have a dependent clause, who moved to Bangkok. More specifically, we call it a relative clause. It's a clause because it has a subject and a verb. Who is the subject and moved is the verb. So it is a relative clause because it starts with a relative pronoun who. When we say relative, it means its meaning depends on the word it is referring to. Like in this case, who refers to Mr. Chan. And it's a clause because, as I said earlier, it has a subject and a verb. We also refer to a relative clause as an adjective clause because it describes a noun. In this case, it describes or gives information about our subject, Mr. Chan. Remember, that's what an adjective does. It describes a noun. It's as simple as that. But instead of just having the normal one-word adjective like beautiful, smart, we have a clause. We have a subject and a verb. Therefore, here's our definition of a relative clause. A relative clause is a clause that starts with a relative pronoun and acts as an adjective in a sentence. And here's a list of the relative pronouns we have in English. And let's see how we can use one of them for our other example. Our organization helps poor communities. We'll establish a new office in Pakistan. Here's another problematic sentence. Again, we have two things. our organization helps poor communities, and it will establish a new office in Pakistan. So, how do we fix this sentence? First, we have to decide what's the main thing we want to say and what's the extra information. Let's say that the most important thing we want to say is our organization will establish a new office in Pakistan. And the other one, our organization helps poor communities, is simply additional information. I want to give the readers a bit of an idea about our organization. So, we can put it this way. Our organization, which helps poor communities, will establish a new office in Pakistan. So you can see that we have two clauses, an independent clause and a dependent clause. For the independent clause, we have our organization as the subject and will establish as the verb. And for the relative clause, which is the subject and helps is the verb. Notice that the verb helps is in singular form since which refers to our organization, which is also in singular form. And by the way, we used which here to refer to the organization. Basically, we use which when the noun is not a person. We use it for things. Alright, time for some exercise. Here are 3 sentences that are not correctly written. I want you to pause this video and use relative clauses to fix them. Okay, let's start correcting them. For the first one, there are 2 things that this sentence is talking about. And we can see that the most important thing in this sentence is the fact that our pastor is retiring in May. The fact that he is a missionary is simply additional information. So, we can put it this way. Our pastor, who is a missionary from the US, is retiring in May. Notice that we had to enclose our relative clauses in commas. That's what we do if the relative clause is just extra information. The second sentence is also talking about 2 things. My phone was given by my brother and it was stolen yesterday. So, which one do you think is the main thing this sentence might be trying to say? Right, the fact that it was stolen yesterday. Therefore, that's going to be our independent clause. And the relative clause, which was given by my brother. So, we can write it this way. My phone, which was given by my brother 2 years ago, was stolen yesterday. And again, notice how the relative clause is enclosed in commas. The third sentence is a little bit different compared to our previous examples because we're using the direct object of the sentence instead of the subject. Okay, let's break them down. So the first clause is I was still finishing my assignment. Subject, I am finishing, verb. And the second one, my assignment, is very complicated. So if we're going to use a relative clause, we should use it for the second part because the most important thing that this sentence is saying is I am still finishing my assignment. But for some reason, we want to describe that it is very complicated. So we can use a relative clause, which is very complicated. So our sentence becomes I'm still finishing my assignment, comma, which is very complicated. So again, notice that we used a comma before our relative clause. because it's just extra information. In all these examples, I want you to notice that the relative clause should be as close as possible to the noun it is describing. Sometimes it isn't possible, but if it is possible, then place it immediately after the noun it is describing. Now, let's look at other examples of sentences with relative clauses. Skydiving is something that you should try if you happen to visit Dubai. I finally met the man whom you were talking about. The first jeans were made by a German immigrant whose name was Levi Strauss. I want to go to a country where there are a lot of beaches. Alright, that ends the first part of our video lesson on relative clauses. Yes, there is a second part. I see the need to create another video because I don't want to confuse you. The next part is gonna be more complicated, and the last thing I want to do is to confuse you. So watch out for the next video. But I won't let you off without giving you an assignment, as always. First, I want you to find 5 sentences that contain relative clauses, especially who and which. Again, don't use a grammar book. I want you to try to find them somewhere else, like the books you're currently reading or articles from the internet. Secondly, write your own sentences. 3 sentences containing who relative clauses and 3 containing which relative clauses. 6 sentences in total. Alright, that ends our video lesson for today. See you in the second part of our relative clauses lesson. God bless you.